Amanda, is the boat market crumbling?
Absolutely not. It's definitely a buyer's market, but not crumbling. In fact, reported boat sales are up this year to date compared to last.
On average, how many days did it take to sell a boat in Q2 of 2026 compared to the same quarter last year?
200 days in 2026 and 202 days in 2025.
And the percentage of sold price to the most recent list price, where does that say right now?
92%, so quick math is 8% under listing price.
Nailed it. Welcome back to Full Displacement. We are here today to talk about Q2 sales report. Amanda, welcome back. How are you doing today?
Doing just fine today, Maryline. Looking forward to going over this sales report with you.
So let's talk about the trends that we are seeing in this quarter's report. First of all, I'm going to bring this on screen.
Great.
And if you watched our prior report on the market, it was back in end of Q1 after the Palm Beach Boat Show. So this report format should look familiar to you. Couple reminders on where the data comes from. We've spoken about sold boats data plenty of times, but the bottom line is there's going to be only one major source of data available to yacht brokers today, and that is the sold boats database that comes from the Boats Group platform. And we as yacht brokers are members of the Boats Group platform, meaning that we have access to the data and we can share with you some of the meaningful trend that we're seeing. But there's a couple of things too that, of course, are to be noted. First of all, that does not mean it's the entire market. Noticeably underreported. We've also mentioned this before. Not all brokers mention or state the price points of the boats that they sell. And Amanda, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, we've seen that more often than not these days, where brokers will just delist or deactivate instead of saying, hey, the boat sold and at this price point, they just end up delisting the vessel. So then the sold boats data doesn't get populated.
And it is entirely reliant on the yacht brokers. So not having this information from them means that it will be incomplete. And then the other thing to point out as well is what I mean, it's not the entire market. The smaller boats, notably, are not going to be represented by a yacht broker. They're not going to be present in this data. So for you all to be aware, we're really looking at larger boats here because that is what is available through the Sold Boats report. Without further ado, let's take a look at the units sold. I guess I'd like to have your thoughts, Amanda, on what you're seeing here, because evidently pre-owned sales are doing well, and that's perhaps not exactly what we've heard. So
I've heard a lot of my clients come to me lately, all worried about the pre-owned market and saying that boats aren't selling. And to be honest, that is a lot of clickbait coming from AI. So I wouldn't be too scared here because the data is showing us that things are pretty flat. They haven't changed very much since last year's Q2. Obviously, it's a little bit more. I mean, you'll speak to that and you can see that here, but pre-owned is up. It looks like 6%.
That's right. So remarkably across the board, new boats, and we had talked about decline of new boats before in our Q1 report, but they're going to be relatively flat. And most of the gains from this quarter are going to be from pre-owned boats. So we're looking at, if you're perhaps in your car or you're listening on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, and you don't see the slides, we'll make those available in the show notes, of course. But the number of listings sold per the Sold Boats data in Q2 of 2026 amounted to 15,241 units. So just a little over 15,000 versus around 14,500 for the same quarter last year. So yeah, a nice increase in pre-owned sales, which bodes well because this is essentially what we do at Current Yachts today. And we're quite thrilled to see that we had some really good activity, but it's really hard to know exactly what's going on. You talk to your colleagues, but that may not be representative of the industry. So seeing this uptick is definitely a good sign. And as you said, it kind of disclaims the fake, claims of AI slop telling you that the market's crashing. Obviously, there's going to be trends that are different by boat categories. Again, if you refer back to the one report, you would see that. But in the case of the overall report, not seeing really concerning trends. But again, there could be differences by classes. So I wanted to now dig into pre-owned sales some more. So let's look at those numbers. Amanda, tell us what you're seeing here. And we're looking at, again, for those who do not have the slides, average sold price, the progression for this quarter versus last year, average sold price to list price as this ratio that we often talk about to see if boats are priced properly, and time on market.
So you do see a little bit of a change here, but very, very slight, only 1.2 change on the average sold price, and it's actually lower. So you're seeing about $2,000 difference in that change. And then you also see average sold as a percent of the listing price has changed a little bit. Boats were selling
It's
at
mostly the same, right? It's like 1% change.
Yeah, 1% change, not that much. And then, of course, we're looking also at the time on market, which hasn't changed hardly at all. The average was 201 days in quarter two of 2025, and now it's 200 days in quarter two of 2026. So that's hardly any change whatsoever. It's still taking an average of 200 days for your boat to actually get sold once put up on the market. And that's a long time for most people. You would expect or want your boat to sell within at least 2 or 3 months once you post it, but that's not the case here.
And this is obviously a composite of, again, different boat classes and sizes. So if there is a particular category or boat type that you'd like us to dig into for the next report, please post your comments below. Happy to share those. It's obviously going to be different relevance for someone that's looking at a sailboat versus a motor yacht versus a smaller express cruiser. You're going to have trends that are different by segment. And in fact, speaking of segments, Amanda, there's one thing we've seen in our recent closings. And there's one particular slice of the market that we tend to deal with pretty heavily, and we're not seeing a ton of traction. Do you want to share what that is?
Yeah, the larger catamarans, and we're talking 50 feet, 48 feet and above, anywhere in that $800 to $1.5 million category is not moving. Those vessels do seem to be staying on the market for a long time, and if they sell, they are selling drastically under price. One that I can name, and I think we've named it before, is a 2024 Lagoon 51 sold for $900,000. In my opinion, that is a good $350,000 under a true market value. But that is the status of the market today if you want to see a boat of that price point move. What we are seeing move are boats that are being paid mostly in cash, and they're under $400,000. So they're in that price point where people are not having to borrow large chunks of change in order to get into these assets. So that's a bit of a trend that we've seen, and don't believe all the AI slop that's out there. There's a lot of clickbait to that. There's a lot of doom and gloom and fear mongering around that. Boats are still moving. It will come around, but the price correction needs to balance itself out.
So obviously here are examples of just really clickbait, as you were saying. It's slop because you can tell the voice and the videos that are shown don't match. It's really about trying to find the things that are going to be clicked on. As you can see, the same format is used for Mercury and then Grand Banks. It's like, who are we trying to fool, right? Like they're all just trying to, oh, and here's Beneteau. Like they're all trying to get your clicks. And it's very interesting. Some of them have made a few points that were actually relevant. And we're wondering, wait, are these people from the industry that seem to like share some deep secrets? But who knows? In the end, none of that can really be verified. And if you ask for sources, they can't give you any. So that gives you an idea of where this comes from.
Right. Yeah. So
Okay.
don't trust everything. Don't trust everything you see out there. You know, I have had clients send me this and they say, oh my gosh, and they get all scared. Is it really that bad? And I say, yes, it is taking longer for boats to sell. And yes, the market is correcting on the price point and the boom that some people paid in 2023. But it isn't meaning that the entire market is dead. Boats are still moving. They're just slower. And yes, it is a buyer's market. So you got to take all of that with a grain of salt.
Another thing, too, that I wanted to point out is I looked at the year-to-date data because we looked at Q1, now we're looking at Q2. If you look at the first 2 quarters of the year, actually all pre-owned boats are up still 4.4% because we had a bit of a decline in the first quarter. So still, first half of the year, plus 4%. I think that's a very encouraging number. And again, pretty excited to see that. The next conversation revolves around co-brokerage, one of my favorite topics. First, what is co-brokerage, Amanda? Let's break this down. for the audience that may not have seen this before, and we could then explain what this trend means today.
Well, basically, co-brokerage is when two brokers work together to get a boat sold. So one is considered the listing broker and one is considered the buyer's broker or the selling broker. So the listing broker is, of course, who signs the listing agreement with the seller, and he is fiduciarily responsible to the seller. If a buyer's broker comes along, or what we call the selling broker, then he would sometimes, in the traditional model, take a percentage, usually a 50-50 split, sometimes a 60-40 split, depending, of the listing terms or the co-brokerage amount that is set. And they usually enter into an agreement in the first conversation or when a purchase and sale agreement is put on the table. There is usually some kind of discussion around the co-brokerage terms. Now, what isn't shown to the public on the Yacht World platform is whether a boat is open to co-brokerage or not. So when the average buyer goes on to Yacht World, they just see the boats that are listed for sale. But us as brokers, we're able to, and we pay for, the back end of the platform called Boat Wizard. And that is where we see the nitty-gritty, such as how many days has this boat been on the market? How many price reductions has it had since its time on the market? And then also, if the boat is open to co-brokerage or not. It doesn't give the terms of the co-brokerage. It just says, yes, the boat is open to co-brokerage, or no, the boat isn't open to co-brokerage. And to be fair, obviously both sides, both brokers, want to earn their money. And so if they see a boat that's not open to co-brokerage, that's a signal to a buyer's representative that that seller is not willing to compensate a buyer's side broker. And therefore, conversation should be had with your buyer, whether or not they're willing to pay you for your times and your service. That's how it should work. The industry, the traditional portion of the industry, is assuming that the seller is responsible for the full 10% brokerage, and that is to be split fairly between the brokerage houses. The way it works usually is the 10% is split 50-50. 2.5% goes to the brokerage house, 2.5% goes to the listing broker, and then 2.5% goes to the selling broker's house, and 2.5% goes to the selling side broker. And therefore, everyone makes money, and this is how the industry has worked for a very long time. As anyone knows who's watched Current Yachts, we do things differently at Current Yachts, and we do not have a set co-brokerage split. In fact, Current Yachts charges our listing clients a selling expense, a flat fee based on the listing price of their vessel. Then we allow the seller to say, hey, I'm willing to compensate an outside broker for bringing me a buyer. I feel like that's worth something. I want him to know that I'm willing to pay him money, or her, of course, if she brings us a buyer. And therefore, they're able to set the terms. And that's what's unusual with the way Current Yachts does business, because it's just an understood or assumed co-brokerage split with a 10% commission model, and that's not always the case.
Yeah, I would go even as far as saying that we know some sellers do not really ask the question. They're not really aware whether or not their listing is open to co-brokerage, because that's been mostly left in the dark and at the discretion of the broker. We are 100% encouraging and pro co-brokerage at Current Yachts. We encourage our sellers to do so, to allow for compensation on the buyer side. But when it's not there, that doesn't mean we can't procure a buyer. It's just we educate sellers and we help them understand the best course of action for them. We've had sellers that came and decided to close their listing to co-brokerage, and after a few weeks or months decided to open it up. Those are definitely options as well. So what this slide is showing is that it should say Q2 of 2026, we actually had 65%, nearly 65% of boats sold that were open to co-brokerage, which is a big jump from that percentage a year ago, which was around 57%. And then I actually went a little bit farther, Amanda. This is the count of all boats offered for sale that were sold in Q2, okay? I looked up for the 30-foot and up the boats that are a little bit larger, because we know we've seen before that co-brokerage seems to be even more prevalent in those cases. So here again, we're looking at currently about 65% of listings overall open to co-brokerage, meaning incentivizing a buyer's broker to bring a buyer. And for
Yep.
larger boats, that percentage has stayed flat over the previous quarter, so Q2 of last year and Q2 of this year, and that number is 78%. I'll invite our audience to go back and look at the previous episode. We did discuss the state of the industry with our friends from Let's and Nats, and we talked about trends in co-brokerage. I'll put that link below as well for those of you who want to learn more about that. But very interesting to see, because to me, that means, again, increased collaboration between brokers, which we saw a little bit in Q1, and that is continuing in Q2.
To trend upwards, which is good. I mean, I love to see the fact that brokers are working together. And I hope the industry joins our trend with us advocating for buyers' representation so that both sides of the transaction can understand the fiduciary responsibility. Instead of being a sub-agent of the listing broker and entering into co-brokerage agreement that way, it should be an understanding that the fiduciary responsibility is to your buyer who you represent.
Absolutely. And again, final takeaway, if you are a seller currently actively listing, congratulations, but find out if your listing is open to co-brokerage. Ask these questions. They matter. Next, Amanda, I did something a little bit different, okay? I pulled some data for this quarter that I want to compare to further back in time. And this data is for top manufacturers. So I wanted to see what are the most popular brands that we're seeing in this quarter. And this is our top 12. So not surprising, you're going to see brands like Sea Ray and Boston
The
Whaler
classics.
at the top.
Yeah.
I put a dark green arrow next to Beneteau, Regal. Those were brands that were already present 10 years ago. We're going to look at that data from 10 years ago to compare it with today's data. And it's showing that those are climbing up the ranks.
Okay.
Chaparral is pretty steady. Grady White was also somewhere in the middle. In lighter green, I'm reflecting brands that we didn't even have on the radar so much 10 years ago. Sea Hunt, Jeanneau, who really propelled themselves with powerboats. And on the sailboat side, we know that market is retracting.
Right.
Yamaha boats, a huge breakthrough there. Tidewater, and then Robalo as well. So just wanted to put these numbers up there for you guys to see. Definitely center consoles. And another interesting point is we always hear and people have this perception that Boston Whaler is like, the hot cake and the best-selling brand. And yes, of course, they sell very large volume of their boats. But it's very interesting to me to see the days on market is actually the lowest for the Sea Hunt boats. Compared to Boston Whaler, it's 116 days for Sea Hunt versus 149 days for Boston Whaler. So again, remember, these are brokerage sales, right? So the boats that we're talking about here are definitely trending bigger, but very interesting to see.
And it's interesting to see here, Maryline, that at Sea Hunt, who is an up-and-coming riser in this same center console brand, their average sold price is $89,000 as opposed to Boston Whaler's $120,000. I mean, I'm rounding up a little bit here, but it goes to show maybe that's why a Boston Whaler is on the market a little longer than a Sea Hunt would be.
Yeah, another thing too to consider is volume-wise. I mean, for every Boston Whaler that is sold, there are over 2 Sea Rays that are sold as well. That dominance from the past couple decades has continued to play out on the brokerage market for sure. And I also highlighted actually the price of a Boston Whaler today on average, as you said, it's $118,000. And we're going to see what it was 10 years ago. I put the red arrow next to Bayliner because actually Bayliner has gone way down, right? And so here is the second slide with the same number from 10 years ago. The first comment is obviously the number of boat sales, right? So 960 for Sea Ray today versus almost 1,700 10 years ago.
Wow.
So I'll let you digest the numbers, but as you can see, the average price of a Boston Whaler at the time was about $52,000. And now we're more than twice that, which is incredible.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Amanda, again, we talked about the retraction in the sailboat market. But brands like Catalina, Hunter were propelled by the sailboat market that is now shrinking so hard that it's like barely a blip on the radar.
Doesn't even exist now, unfortunately. Yeah.
Brands like Four Winds that are probably doomed to go away. And that's just how the market moves, So
yeah.
just wanted to share the tidbits. They're quite interesting for everybody to compare and stay on top of brands. So with this, that's the market data for today. There were a couple other things we wanted to discuss with you, Amanda. We've heard a major announcement in the boat building department in the last, I guess, 2 weeks or so.
Yeah.
Care to share with our audience what that was?
Yes. Unfortunately, we heard of the bankruptcy of Katie Krogan, and that's, really unfortunate to see such a beautiful brand to now go down. And of course, that's the parent company of American Tug as well. So not only are we seeing a certain segment of the market that a ton of the great loopers love not being able to be, well, I should say they're going to be serviced, but not by the actual manufacturer anymore. So I was reading an article today, Maryline. You can give us the details on that. But a family, a man who has worked his whole life, it's now the time for him to retire. He puts his deposit down on a Katie Krogan, and come to find out now that deposit may be in jeopardy and he may not ever see his dream boat or the money he put down on it.
Yeah, it gets even worse. I actually connected with these buyers who put all of the money down. The boat's actually completed and sitting in Taiwan, but because the building arm of the company is owed this money, Katie Krogan cannot pay, and therefore the boat will not be released. So it's an asset that's being held as part of the bankruptcy, and who knows if A, they'll get any of that money back, B, let alone the boat, which is just really heartbreaking. So anyway,
It is.
hoping to bring more of that story to you. But yeah, wanted to put in light the risks of at any stage, even a
Sure.
reputable
Any
builder like
stage.
Katie Logan.
Sure. Yeah. And that's something to be aware of in buying a new boat and putting down your deposit is to check and see what the terms are in your agreement, in your decision making, even in the construction loan process sometimes, what the payout terms are, and God forbid if something like this happens.
So lots of lessons to be learned, and we hope to have one of these owners perhaps share their story with us. So I'll let you know. As far as the next market report, as I said, I'd love to know what segments you're interested in so we can dive into the data a little bit more. I'm sure we'll have a ton of catamaran buyers, sellers potentially that want to learn more. It's very cool because then you can dig into it so far as, taking the size of the boats and compare the price per foot, right, over the years, over the quarters. Age of the boat sold. We can go as far as finding out, how many price reductions potentially. So there's a lot we could dig into, but we really want to make it relevant for you. So either we work with you and we can share this data because this is how you can position an offer, or if you're curious about a particular type of boat, and we can pull this for the next quarterly report. With this, we will see you next week on the Full Displacement podcast. Thanks for watching.
Fair winds.